Welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining me today. The purpose of this, of course, is to really talk about your career journey, what's milestones and key points that really defined your career and allowed you to progress as far as you have. Everything is from a leadership excellence perspective. So, with that, let's start at the beginning. How did your leadership journey start?
Eric, first, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to engage in the conversation and really excited to watch your future podcasts, given the amazing network of people that you have tapped into. My leadership journey really started growing up. I was surrounded by leaders. I was surrounded by my grandmother, who was constantly out in the community, making an impact in the lives of individuals who were really pretty economically disadvantaged. I was also really influenced by watching my parents, who were leaders in our community, whether it was 4-H or our church in our little small town in the mountains of Oregon. And that instilled in me this sense of, I guess, opportunity, or maybe it was something locked in my DNA. I don't know. But for the rest of my life, since those moments, I've always had my radar on for opportunities that I've had to make an impact. And probably the moment that solidified that the most in my early adulthood was being an exchange student with Rotary. Rotary is an international service organization of professionals. When I was sponsored by them to be a Rotary exchange student, it completely opened my world up to a group of individuals who are not only at the top of their games professionally, but they use their platforms and their skills to really affect a huge amount of positive change in their communities. So I would say that those were some of the big milestones and influences for me.
That's interesting. I have these conversations a lot, and people always talk about mentors, and parents come up occasionally, but I haven't heard someone say grandmother before. Was there something distinctive about what you remember about her that would made such a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. There were so many things, actually. We're fifth generation Oregonians. We literally came over on the Oregon Trail. My grandmother raised my dad and his siblings initially in a homestead that didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing. Like by objective measures, she was very poor. But she had this incredible wealth of energy and desire to make everybody's life around her better. So she would go to the food bank. She would pack boxes of food custom to individuals in the community who were unable to get out because they were too elderly or too sick or whatever the circumstance was. And that was just one aspect of her life where she embodied leadership through acts of service. And it was profoundly formative for me to watch.
Yeah, it is. It's always actions. And, talk is cheap. Just the vivid images you're painting in my mind of the Oregon Trail, I'm sure there would be novels and novels of stories inside her to pick her brains that made her who she was. But certainly I can see how that would be very, very helpful in terms of setting the standard and the tone of how you should comport yourself and really live your life. That point about maybe not wealthy in riches, but wealthy in so many other ways that it's all on how you measure. Certainly. Also, could you elaborate? Where did you go first when you on the Rotary as an exchange student? Was it more than one country, or was it
You
one
know, I
specific?
was I lived for a year with host families in Australia, which had been my lifelong dream since I was 5 years old to go. So I was an exchange student when I was 16 years old, and
Right.
first time ever leaving the country. And that one experience completely changed the header of my whole life. And so since that first time overseas, I've lived and worked and studied, volunteered in more than 85 countries. It was hugely impactful.
Broadened your horizons, opened you up at a young age. I can see how that would make such a profound difference. Along that way, and getting to know different cultures and how to adapt and become really savvy on all of that. Like Oregon's not the same as Australia, even Australia itself. So there's different cultures across the continent and adapting to all of that. Can you share a leadership challenge that significantly shaped who you are today from those early days, or is this more of a progression?
Hmm.
A leadership challenge.
Leadership challenge. I would say less of a challenge and more of an opportunity to answer the call, a call that I didn't have to answer. So, an example of this for me is at the end of college, I started leading teams of volunteers to the jungles of Nicaragua, a place where I had gone for research when I was an undergrad. This really remote northeast corner of the jungle of Nicaragua. Basically, there was a hospital there, an orphanage, a school, a jail, where we would go and volunteer. And it got to the point where there's so much interest in people to go on these trips, which were a couple weeks long. And we ended up doing about 4 of them a year, that I realized we had essentially reached a critical mass where what seemed to be the next step was to codify it, to solidify it, to formalize it into its own 501(c)(3) nonprofit. Now, I could have followed the same path that a lot of my fellow graduates followed, which was going and, establishing themselves in incredible careers and starting on their paths up the corporate ladder. I elected to take a different route. And so the challenge that I answered the call of was to incorporate and run with a wonderful group of volunteer board of directors this nonprofit organization for the first 4 years after graduating from college.
That is an amazing thing to do. And you're right, like the average person is not going down that road. I can imagine that took a lot of inner self-confidence. What are you doing? What's going on? Why would you do that from everybody around you? What drove that self-confidence that who you are inside as a person?
I would say a big driver of that was the Ford Family Foundation in Oregon. This was an organization founded by Kenneth Ford, who made his wealth and was really like a timber magnate in Oregon and Northern California. And he wanted to position students, kids from rural communities in such a spot in their lives where they could make bold moves, where they could go and they could do work like this without feeling encumbered by student loans. This scholarship, I had to use it in Oregon, but I essentially emerged from undergrad amazingly with basically no debt. And that's what allowed me the freedom. I still needed to work jobs to pay bills. I worked at the front desk of a hotel for a couple of years. I was a barista, jobs that allowed me the flexibility to take off whenever I needed or wanted to go lead these humanitarian missions. But it was that flexibility that allowed me to not feel a sense of urgency. So I might not have been putting money into my 401(k), but at least I wasn't burdened by, the same levels of student loan debt that would maybe cause a lot of people to think twice. And I recognize what a huge gift and privilege that was from the Ford Family Foundation.
Yeah, certainly. And obviously that's a great story, what it truly does. And that connection and achieving the goals that the Ford Foundation obviously what we're going for. You're emblematic of that. It's interesting when you say that though, like you worked in customer facing roles is what I heard you say. I also heard you say you were in Nicaragua and you developed a whole team. It sounds really like in addition to being very self-confident, you're very people oriented. It's all about people in your approach. Am I on base there? What drives you to be so focused on, be so engaging with people in general, as opposed to being task oriented? I guess what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's a great question, Eric. And I think it really centers on my experience of knowing what it feels like to have had people who invested in me and how transformative that was, how people really created like held space to create an environment for success where I could try new things, where I could see myself in new ways. And I wanted that to be a cornerstone of any of the teams that I built, whether it's in the nonprofit, whether it's volunteer teams, etc., to create a space where people could have an environment where they can have the safety to be able to make mistakes, to learn new things about themselves, to figure out how their unique contributions can add value to the overall big picture. And so for those trips in Nicaragua, I focused on creating a space. There was no one set program. It's not like, okay, you're a volunteer on my trip, Eric, and today we are all going to go out and build a well. Some of us will go out and build a well today. Other people who really feel an affinity for kids might go and volunteer at the school or at the orphanage. Someone else who might have an interest in community health, we might set them up as a volunteer at the local hospital or fill in the blank. So I never thought about leadership as a one size fits all. I felt like the best way I could serve these communities in Nicaragua was by empowering these individuals to bring their best, whatever that looks like.
Versatile or flexible, I guess, in a sense. Obviously, you've had some great mentors to copy, but are there any specific habits or practices that you you employ on a regular basis for to lead effectively and identify who does what, who's going to want to do what, um, and really help develop them. Do you have any specific habits around that that you try to follow?
Yeah. So I would say there's two different altitudes that I approach it on. The first one is I am really fixated on having clarity of vision. I want to make sure that our starting point is exactly why we exist as a team, as an organization, etc. This is essentially telling a story about why we're here collectively. And I want to tell as clear of a story so that an individual can either see themselves as a part of that story or not. Because I want people to be able to self-select out if this mission, if this way that we're approaching it is not for them. So that's the first stage gate. The second piece, I know what the mission is, and I know the components that it takes to have that. And so we know that we need individuals in certain seats in order to advance that mission. But within that, within each role, there's an opportunity for curiosity. And I think that curiosity can be a leader's superpower to be able to understand what lies beneath the surface of someone's resume and what is the unique array, a constellation of experiences that these individuals can actually bring to bear that can make our outcomes, our innovation, our culture even more rich.
How do you go about teasing all that out so that, yeah, I'm what you're going to go, I think you really love going over here and the other person would love going somewhere else.
First, it takes a leader being down in the weeds. You have to understand what life is like for those people on the front line before you can even have that curiosity to make those connections between where does somebody's passion exist and where's the critical needs. I think a lot of times leaders, especially when they're hired into organizations, it takes them too long to get down to the front line to really understand what the work is on a daily basis. What does that grind look like? What are the experiences of those individuals who are keeping the lights on, keeping the mission going? I think that's one of the biggest gifts a leader can give to themselves and to the organization is to really dig into that. Because once you do, then you can start to understand the incredible variability of the type of individuals who can succeed in these roles. And you can start to see how we don't want everybody who has the same mindset to all be working together. We want people who feel the safety to be able to challenge ideas, who can respectfully dissent, because it's that act of the healthy friction that
Right.
actually allows us to innovate and get to the best ideas and outcomes.
I hear a lot of trust coming out of this. Like you understand the world I'm coming from and what I'm walking through. And so when I ask you to do something, you understand me. Or when you ask me to do something, you understand me in terms of what my issues are. So many leaders don't. It's like, I've got to hit that goal. And they fail to think about the people that have to do the work and come along for the ride. And everybody has to be treated differently. Do you find that a challenge in terms of treating everybody differently according to their needs? How do you go about doing that?
I don't find it a challenge necessarily. I find it an imperative. Because the reality is, and we learned this through COVID, especially as we saw people forced into remote work environments, even within remote work, support looks different for everybody. Some people have a higher need for social connection. Some people have a higher need for structure. We needed to understand what this looks like. We, as in people managers, needed to understand what every single person on our team needed in order to navigate this uncertainty, the complexity, and the novelty, the first time experience for a lot of individuals of being in an environment like this that's so unfamiliar, and to feel really
Mm,
separated without the support of an in-person community and that feeling of belonging. So I would say that managers have and COVID is a very, very extreme example, obviously. But I
mm.
think that to your question about is it a challenge for us to be able to customize this approach, I would say that if we don't have the time to do that, that we're not prioritizing things in the right way. Because our people are our biggest resource. Our employees are our best brand ambassadors. So when we think about how we treat them and we develop them, we have to realize that we're doing more than just investing in this one interaction. We're actually advancing the success of the organization as a whole.
It's around focus and foundational. You get the people right. You treat them right, everything else happens. It's something that some people do take for granted. What strategies have you used to build within teams, especially during change? Like COVID, you're really having to, like you said, yeah, I get it. I know where we're going and I know where we have to get to. But how do you bring everybody along for the ride?
I'll share an example outside of COVID. One of my favorite modes to be in is in an entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial space. So the ability to create something within an organization that maybe didn't exist before, which is why a lot of my background includes work creating and running corporate foundations. And I was hired by the CEO of a sports and nutritional supplement company to create a foundation for veterans. And what this entailed was building a staff from scratch, building a curriculum from scratch, finding a location in the United States. And so we had these disparate team members who all needed different kinds of support, who all came with different backgrounds. And what I realized is that I needed to let go of the idea that culture, community, and support is only coming from myself and the immediate team. So for these individuals, how could I actually create an environment for community and connection for them, even amidst us being remote? And the way that looked like, I actually reverted back to my childhood with Rotary. So I actually created a budget line item for every single one of my direct reports to go out, and I encourage them to join a local Rotary Club, to be a part of a community of professionals who are dedicated to fellowship and making their communities better. I found that this was a huge return on investment because they were learning leadership skills. They were feeling whole and satisfied, both as professionals and as people. And it is a page that I added to my playbook that I will continue to use for the rest of my career, probably.
That's an interesting way in investing in people. We hear people say, oh, the most successful leaders are the ones that invest in the people. And they demonstrate that through concern, feedback, really interest in all of that. But putting them in a program like Rotary, I've not heard of anyone else do that. I can see that the point of how it aligns with what you're doing, but that's an incredible example of how to do that. Is there anyone in particular that you would ever think of? You don't have to name names, but where you really mentored someone and made such a difference in terms of their own career path? You've talked about the mentors you've had that have allowed you to really go off in a different direction. Can you think of someone where you've made a big difference and how you did that in mentoring them?
Yeah, for sure. So going back to this organization for veterans, we designed the organization specifically to cater to veterans who were struggling with, it could be PTSD, suicidal ideation, alcoholism, unemployment, homelessness, just individuals, men and women who really found themselves struggling with what civilian life looked like after the service, many of them combat veterans. And there was a young Marine who was part of the program, and I still remember the exact moment when I met up with him and I met his girlfriend. She was 19 years old at the time, very, very, very smart. We were in Pittsburgh when I met them in the parking lot of this grocery store. And it was this moment where I saw a huge amount of potential in someone. And I realized that she had all this energy, but nowhere to focus it. And so for me to take a risk on her, I hired her to be my executive assistant for the foundation, got her set up with an office and laptop, and got her back up to our headquarters in Manhattan, and really empowered her to run big projects and events, which she did with astonishing excellence, and paid for her to join the local Rotary Club, where she started getting mentored by seasoned pillars of the community and professionals. And it was just so much fun to watch her blossom as a leader herself. That's really what she grew into. She became a leader within our organization. And I was able to create an environment for that to happen, but it had to be her own internal drive and realizing that these were things within her reach that allowed it to happen. I'm very proud of her.
You recognized something in her really early on and gave her an opportunity. Did she see it, or was it more of she had to, get there? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
I don't think she saw it at the time. In fact, probably for most of us, the things that we don't know, we don't know. are the
Right.
biggest bucket in our lives, right? Those inherent blind spots. I don't think that she realized that this work was even one avenue that she could choose. Probably because not a lot of people even know it exists, but she didn't second guess it. She didn't ask, is this for me? The door opened. She walked through, even though she had no point of reference for it at all.
It's an excellent story, and it's something that you always take with you in making a difference. We'll end it on this. What leadership traits do you think will be critical for the future, particularly the next 5 to 10 years, with all the change, literally everything that's going on, how we do anything is changing so much. AI, technology, remote work, communication, face to face, but through a screen as opposed to sitting beside them in their office. All of that. When you put all that together, what leadership traits do you believe will be the most critical for the next 5 to 10 years?
There is a study that some researchers did. I'm afraid I'm going to misquote the exact details of it, but the long and the short of it was they did a longitudinal study that began with fourth grade girls, and they examined them over the course of their lives, over decades, to determine what were the success factors that allowed them to flourish personally, professionally, with their families, socially, with their friends, with all of their relationships. And they analyzed what were the key traits that these young girls exhibited when they were in the fourth grade. And there were three key themes that emerged. One was insight into themselves, insight into others. We might call this emotional intelligence. We might call it self-awareness. The other idea that emerged, or leadership capability, was mutuality. This idea that you don't have to win at my expense or vice versa, that there's ways that we can both reach our goals. And then the third trait, very interestingly, was emotional regulation. So when we think about, which is really interesting, right? When you think about kids, especially young girls at that age, like when emotions are running high, and boys develop slower, so their emotions start running high a few years later. But the essence of this, insight, mutuality, emotional regulation, I think these are really important. I think that we can't go wrong with these. But when you're talking about the next 5 years, when you're talking about disruptions caused by artificial intelligence, I think these are things that we all need a great measure of. We need to be able to slow down enough so that we understand how we are experiencing the world around us, how we're experiencing technology, how we're experiencing each other, how we're experiencing volatility sociopolitically, and to be able to take stock of how it is that we're doing ourselves. Too much in our society today, things are so polarized that this idea of mutuality, this is something that people just don't talk about, because there seems to only be equations that we're given where there's a winner and there's a loser. And for some reason, the structure doesn't seem to allow for multiple parties to win or to succeed. And I think that the challenge of the internet, of digital technology, is this idea of reduced inhibition phenomena, this idea that we can allow ourselves to be unfiltered through the anonymity or through the safety of the internet in a way that we would never interact in person or if we were speaking live. So that idea of we can actually demonstrate better insight, we can actually pursue mutuality if we do the third thing, which is learn how to practice emotional regulation more. So there's a lot of different leadership traits that we could point to as success factors for the next 5 years. Those are three of my favorites.
Yeah, I love what you talked there about self-awareness tied in with that emotional control in a sense of mutuality is it seems to be lacking right now, but I would venture that that has got to be one of the secrets to being very, very successful, period. If you want to really truly achieve your goals and all of that. Listen, Matt, I want to thank you for your time today. This has just been a great conversation. I really appreciate these kinds of insights and really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to talking to you again soon. So thanks again.
Eric, thanks so much for the questions, and thanks so much for inviting me to chat. I really enjoyed this discussion a lot.